Anyone that's been ill with a long-term or debilitating illness will be familiar with the following phenomena. And even if you've not had a long-term one, you may well be able to relate to this. Every day is a bit of a challenge. You get through the day, you do what you've got to do. But there's that person in your life who has a very Pollyanna view of everything. They take everything at a superficial level and never really understand. And you might be having yet another very, very bad day, and you encounter this person in your life. Oh, hi, how are you? Everything okay? Whoa. And they're really upbeat and bright and breezy. Now, they should be able to tell that you're not well, because you're never well, because you've got a long-term debilitating illness. And you may well tell them, no, I'm not well. Oh, no. Why? What's happened? Well, the same thing that's happened for the last 12 years. It's my debilitating illness that's, quite... Oh, okay, fine. Well, I didn't know. And off they go again. And then the next time you meet them, hi, how are you? Everything's bright and breezy. They are never able to integrate the fact that you, as an identity, have actually got a problem, because the picture they have in their head of you is never updated with any information you give them. And so something begins to happen. Because people do this to varying degrees anyway. What starts to happen is go, hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. When everything is anything but fine. And this is quite a common thing. We put on the brave face just because it's easier. A lot of people with things like depression or anxiety disorders, as well as physiological health problems, will report this is how they have to get through life, because it's just easier. Because if you try and explain to the person what's wrong, they turn it into a thing and turn it into something about themselves. Now think about the exact opposite to that, where you have somebody who, it doesn't matter what you do, you could do anything, and they always see it as a disaster. It doesn't. If you went on this particular holiday, they always have, oh, that must have been, you should have gone somewhere else. They always have it doesn't matter what you do, they can always put a dampener on it. They see you and project to you a whole bunch of negative qualities that you don't possess. And it doesn't matter how much you try and convince them. Some parents will do this. It doesn't matter how much you try and convince them. They never update the picture they have in their head of you. And so they constantly project out something's wrong. Now, if you type into YouTube, parents trick baby, you'll find I'm not quite sure if this is child abuse or not. You'll find the videos of parents, they've got a small infant, and they bang the door, and then suddenly go to the baby, oh, and as though the baby's banged its head, because nothing's happened. Almost immediately, the baby is cued into crying and distress. And it seemed to be a popular thing on TikTok for a while. I don't know why. I don't know why people treat their children in this way, for the likes and the views, I guess. Now imagine both of those things coexisting inside the same person. So what we now have is massive inappropriate affect. Inappropriate affect is when you have the person who will smile their way through their anger. They will cry their way through a positive state. It basically, whatever they're communicating to you, they're expressing it through a completely different emotion. And, you've got to look on the bright side, haven't you, as their life falls apart. And they are never actually connecting to the reality of their experience, and therefore are never really connecting to the reality of your experience. And so this starts to set up a whole bunch of weird mindset stuff and emotional impropriety. And this is one of the key areas you'll find in Munchausen's by proxy, where essentially a caregiver, I think it's about 90% of all cases, it's mother to child. And the majority of those cases, I think that's about 75%, the child is under 6 years old, and about 50% is actually going to be under 2 years old. So they always go for the small child. And others will be caregivers in some capacity, whether they're nurses or carers or doctors, whatever. But it's less common in that population demographic. What we find is with that parent or that caregiver is now delivering care, but not because it changes what's happening for the child or the recipient of the care, but because it changes the status and position the caregiver themselves has. And so now this can start to become an interesting dynamic for that individual to experience. That when I give care, when I'm seen as the carer, it changes both my status, but also the way that people view me, and it changes my state. Often it's quite calming. So some people will find things to fix because it calms them. Some people find lives to fix because it calms them. The rescuer. And then there's the Munchausens by proxy. Now what we have is somebody who needs there to be a dependency. They need there to be something in order for them to fulfill the caring role. But it's not the caring role where I'm helping you. It's the caring role where I'm helping you so people see me. I'm the center of your suffering. And when you're not suffering, I need to engineer it so you are in order for me to fulfill that role. And now what we have is the Munchausen by proxy who induces the condition inside the child or inside the recipient of their care. So they're both able to be the rescuer and the nurturer. And so now you, my recipient, have to appreciate me because you don't know that I'm doing these things to you. And now other people can see me as the heroic rescuer and caregiver. And aren't I a great human being as a result of that? So now, as a parent or as a caregiver, I now have to engage in subterfuge and weird ways in which I can both make you ill and let everybody know that I'm the one saving you. Because just making you ill and then saving you and helping you doesn't bring me the attention. I've got to basically get other parties involved with this. And this is where it can get really ugly. Because now I hospital hop, I shop around to different doctors because I need to find players. There'll be some people who won't necessarily take me seriously, will dismiss the symptoms that I'm giving, the reporting, of the child. I need to find people who will engage now with weird esoteric diagnosis. So I take vague symptoms of my child to you, the doctor, and I tell you all this weird stuff. Nothing comes back in the tests. So you may now have a pet project of what you think it might be. And so now you make the referrals for further investigations and tests. And now a paper trail on the medical file begins to grow. Because if you, the doctor, have written, query this, query that as possible diagnosis, and that's the investigations, then other people are going to be biased to looking at those things too. Now remember, if it's a 6-month-old baby, they can't really give you very good verbal feedback as to what their symptoms are. So they're dependent entirely on the caregiver to give the information that they're looking for. And the caregiver, of course, often will have researched these things in order to know what to say. Now, herein lies a particular difficulty, because now there are such things as cot deaths. There are such things as conditions that cause failure to thrive. And they have lots of different things in terms of what causes that. Some children are very accident prone, and some children are very sickly. That's a problem, because now a parent who has the sickly child, the accident-prone child, may well find themselves subjected to suspicion. Whereas a parent who's highly skilled at manipulating people and doing the charm offensive may not necessarily draw attention to themselves in a suspicious way. They're managing to get the attention to themselves in the way that they desire. Here's some scenarios that I have seen firsthand. Now, fortunately, and from a selfish position, fortunately, because of my position within the accident and emergency departments in which I worked, I never actually got involved directly in these scenarios. This was left to the pediatric nurse specialists and senior clinicians. And this is essentially what used to be termed back then a BID, which is a brought-in dead. And nearly always a BID is an infant. So it will be the parents have woken up. It's always in the morning. The parents have woken up and found their baby dead. Now, this is horrendous, absolutely, possibly the worst thing any adult can experience, the death of their child. Now, here's the scenario that will typically happen. They freak out, will phone an ambulance, will do everything they can to try and wake the baby up. The paramedics will arrive and attempt resuscitation and bring the child in. And quite often, they may well have phone through to say, not looking good. Now, at that point, we have an unexpected and query suspicious death. So not only have these poor parents now lost their baby, but now the police will be involved. Of course they will be, because it will automatically be referred. And they will, handle it, hopefully, with sensitivity. But in the background of everyone's mind is this genuinely a cot death? Is this generally a medical event that's happened spontaneously? Or have the parents done it, or one of the parents done it, or somebody else in the household done this? And so this is now the horrendous scenario that people now have to deal with, and as sensitively as possible. But imagine being on the receiving end of that if you're that parent. So not only have you lost your child, and within the hour or two of that event happening, you're now scrutinised and subjected to evaluation, and your medical records, the baby's history will be looked at, and every which way, police interviews. Not good at all. And of course, so many people being involved and so many people in the environment that the parents may well find themselves in, they may well detect one or two attitudes from people that are not necessarily entirely positive. So it's a horrendous situation. Now, Roy Meadows, who coined the term Munchausen's by proxy, he was probably accurately describing a phenomena where parents were inducing illness in the child. When long-term debilitating illness without any explanation is the child is removed from the parent or the caregiver, the child will frequently then suddenly improve. And only upon returning to the parent will you find the deterioration happens again. That's a key area of suspicion. Now, there's no doubt that happens. However, Roy Meadows, who had all sorts of accolades and awards through his highly decorated medical career, unfortunately went on as an expert witness in a number of cases that were then overturned. The most famous one being Sally Clark, who was a lawyer herself and lost 2 children, and was convicted and sentenced to life. She was, I think, released after about 3 years. She never recovered from the horror and the trauma of the whole thing, and unfortunately succumbed to the consequences that this had on her. And she not only lost 2 children, but she was subjected to international, because she's a baby killer, international condemnation in the media. And you can imagine her time in prison during those 3 years before it was overturned and she was released upon appeal, because it was clearly proven that she had not done this. It was a medical thing. She wouldn't have had a good time in those 3 years. So not only has she lost 2 children, but also she has been subjected to scandalous thing in all the tabloid newspapers, and would have been brutalized undoubtedly at the hands of other prisoners. So this is just a horrendous situation all round. And that wasn't the only case. There's been a number of cases in the UK, and worldwide that has been replicated. Now, this is the problem, because innocent parents who've lost a child may well be subjected to scrutiny. Innocent parents who have had or got children who are accident prone. We had a kid who used to come into the department in which I worked. He would announce his arrival. "It's me!" And of course, he knew a lot of the nurses. We used to see him so frequently. It was insane. And he was that kid. He was undoubtedly hyperactive, undoubtedly highly intelligent. So he blew it up, threw it, jumped off it, all that kind of stuff, set light to it, did all of those things. And there was no doubt in anyone's mind that it was him doing this. And the parents, of course, are constantly worried that they're going to be accused of stuff. And I get it. I totally understand why they would have been so concerned. As will other parents who've got, say, the sickly child or other things that necessitate regular, or even children that have got that weird esoteric disorder that no one can actually identify what it is. And of course, there'll be suspicion. So therein lies a particular difficulty. In the UK legal system, Munchausen's by proxy is not permitted. It does not exist as a medical legal definition. You essentially only have child abuse or child murder if it results in the death of a child. And I believe that's probably the same for Australia as well, but it's probably not elsewhere in the world. And herein lies one of the positions of the legal system in the UK, and also of many psychiatrists. Is Munchausen's by proxy defined by the action perpetrated upon the child, or is it defined by the motive of the parent or the caregiver who's doing this, the perpetrator? So is it defined by the action upon the child, or is it defined by the motives of the perpetrator? And in the UK legal system, it is not definable. It is only what is, because we can't say the parent or the caregiver was motivated by X, Y, and Z, because we can't possibly know that. So it's defined by the action upon the child, which has already a definition of murder or child abuse or whatever legal categories those things then get subsequently put into. So now what we have is the issue of abuse, where the abuse is perpetrated. It's a medical abuse that's perpetrated upon the child, and the parent rescues, and abuse that is actually murder, and it's a way of a serial killer hiding behind. Beverly Allitt is the most famous one from the UK, and I know internationally that was a widespread story, because people were shocked that a young nurse could murder so many babies, and it's just absolutely horrendous. Her method of choice was insulin, although the most common method is usually asphyxia, so smothering, or starvation. And then there's lots of other ones as well, but asphyxia and starvation are the two most common things, which again accounts for about 75% of the total of all acts perpetrated under the guise of Munchausen's by proxy. Now, Beverly Allitt, of course, was the one who was the most famous Munch by proxy. As a nurse, she was effectively just killing babies. And as a result of the drama that would happen on the medical units in which she worked, she would be at the center of all of that drama. Because obviously she's created it, and she could insert herself in the middle of that. She's not creating these acts as something she can rescue the child from and have the heroic position. She's just putting herself in the middle of a drama that she finds some kind of emotional gratification from. Whereas some parents, they're not aiming to kill the child. That's not the motive. The motive is, now I can create a foundation. I can do fundraising. I can have a GoFundMe page. I can have the pictures on the website. I can have a website put up. I can have my Facebook page and the Twitter, and I get the community to group together. I can run a support group for other parents, and oh my God, the child doesn't have to do very much now, because once the machinations are in place, now the parent becomes the celebrity caregiver parent with all these things. And of course, people being well-meaning, especially because it's a child, will want to get involved with that and support and help and donate and all those kind of things. Now we have another area of is how much of this is done for financial gain and fraud. Because often with all these kind of attention and awareness raising, there's fundraising. And of course, there are no medical legal bills being paid because the child's not sick. However, sometimes the child will be hospital hopped and around clinicians and everything else, but the parent may well be shaving the head, may well be fabricating bruises on the arm from intravenous strips. The child's never actually going to hospital. They may be starving the child as well, forcing the child to sit in a wheelchair, those kind of things. But again, the child's never seen a doctor. Herein lies another difficulty. You'll have doctors and clinicians who may well be very well aware of some things in the public domain that are either Munchausen's or Munchausen's by proxy, but they can't say anything because medical legal confidentiality. You can't say anything. And so the media can run the story. There was one recently, about 10 years ago, where I used to live. There was a guy who was homeless. He was a Falklands War veteran, and he had been post-traumatic stress, and he was on the streets and he was homeless, and the local paper ran the front page story of this poor man. It's the middle of winter and he's never been helped by the military, and it's just awful, and he's been rejected by hospitals and by caregivers and all the rest of it, and he's homeless because of his mental health needs. I knew him, and I knew he'd never been in the army. He was Munchausen's. And I also knew that there were plenty of people like myself who were well aware of who he was and the lies and the stories he'd give. But we can't say anything because that's illegal for us to do so. And yet the media will run the story. There was a famous one, just along these lines, there was a famous one of the pianist who was washed up on the beach with no memory. Remember this? I think it happened in Wales quite a few years ago. And it was this amazing story about this man who's got no memory of who he is. He does not know who he is. And yet for some reason he discovers he's an absolutely amazing pianist. Look up the story. Every single person in that man's history knew exactly who he was. This the great thing about who is he? Why does he speak with this funny accent? Where is he from? We must try and help this man. Well, there were doctors and nurses and psychiatric staff and psychologists and police officers and lots of people who absolutely knew who he was and knew he was Munchausen's because that's what he does. But the international media still run the story. Now, the same kind of machinations will happen around especially a sick child that people want to help. And of course, let's just say the media aren't always accurate anyway, and will quite often start to inflate the story, add details in that aren't quite true, in fact, complete lies. Other media outlets pick up on that aspect of the story, then exaggerate it themselves, and then the story grows. Now, that serves the Munchausen by proxy parent superbly, because they now have other people doing the job for them. It's a little bit like with the narcissist and their flying monkeys. And the flying monkeys often don't realize they're the flying monkeys assisting a narcissist. And so it gets quite complicated as more and more people get involved, and it's easier to hide. It's easier for the Munch Bunch parent to actually hide in this maelstrom of attention. And of course, they enjoy it. And all this fundraising, and there'll be balloons and badges given out and all sorts of interesting things. Now, herein lies another difficulty for both clinicians and also normal parents. So, when the child is presented to the doctor, doctor, my child had a fit. Now, obviously, the child's not fitting now. And so they'll run the tests. They may well, the child seems fine, test fine. If it happens again, bring her back. And it happens again, they bring her back. But of course, the fits are over by the time either the paramedics arrive or the child is conveyed to the doctor's surgery or to the accident department, which is the case for most acute onset illnesses. How many parents have had a child who they've just gone blue and done something really weird, and think, oh my God, panic, call the ambulance or rush them to the doctor, and then the kid's fine. That's what happens. So very, very commonly, doctors and medical people are reliant on parents to actually give the data, because by the time the child is being seen, the situation has passed. Now, with that in mind, of course, the Munch Bunch parent can really capitalize on that and can start to, if it's an older child, coach the child as to what's happened to them. So essentially inducing some kind of false memory to tell the child this is what you've done. And then when the doctor says, so what happened to the 4-year-old? I felt funny and I fell over. And no such thing happened. Or it's because she can't remember because she had a fit. So those kind of things. And sleep apnea, of course, and all these other bits that get reported. So again, this makes it very difficult for medical staff to actually assess what's really going on, and it may take some time before any suspicion gets raised. And of course, simultaneously, people like me who are very aware of Munchausen's and Munchausen by proxy, I tend to be suspicious of everybody. And that itself, if I was still working in a clinical environment, that itself would also be problematic, especially now if there's a team of people just like me. And we're like, oh, suspicious. And that's it. Now that's the mindset we're now in. And the converse also is true. It's really problematic. And this is why then we find children who are subjected to masses of unnecessary tests when there's actually nothing wrong with them, because they do believe the parents. Because to disbelieve is also equally as problematic. Another area that we'll find Munchausen by proxy is with pets. Now, with a parent or a caregiver to a child, you have two motives. They're either going to be a killer or they'll be the savior. At this point, it's just worth mentioning before I go on to pets. This is a horrifying statistic. I actually wrote this down. 75% is perpetrated on children under 6 years old. 25% of those children, so a full quarter of children who are identified to have been affected by caregiver parental Munchausen by proxy, they have a dead sibling. So essentially, there's either been an unexpected death, and that's tripped the parents over the edge. That's where they got the taste for it. Or they've already killed another child. And that is a horrifying, horrifying statistic. And if you want to know more on that, just Google it. It is horrifying when you start to look at the data analysis and the breakdown. Now, Munchausen's by proxy in pets or in an animal starts to get interesting too. Because I can kill an animal. I can have my animal put to sleep. Because a lot of vets will comply, because some cities, some states are so overloaded in the animal shelters, and they have kill shelters as opposed to no kill shelters, because there's just so many damn animals that are just being abandoned every day. So vets can be quite eager to, or quite compliant with putting pets to sleep. Now, the difficulty with Munchausen by proxy for that person with a pet is, how do you raise the attention? How do you get to be the celebrity, the focus of the pet's illness? So they have to work quite hard at that. And it may well be that they get plenty of it from the veterinary surgery. They may have it from particular relatives. They may, well, have a GoFundMe or a fundraiser, that kind of stuff too. They may open an animal shelter. Now, 2 years back, I came across an individual who I was very, very suspicious of their motives around a fundraising thing for animals. And there was just a thing that crossed my mind. I've got no evidence for this. I don't even know if it's true. But it just did occur to me. Is this a person who actually is quite enjoying the rescuing of the animals? Yeah. So now is the problem. Because nothing bad is being done to the animals. Because they're being rescued. But when people have these slight oddities, then we have to look at, well, what's the motive? But are we diagnosing these things by motive or by the action perpetrated? Herein lies the difficulty. And now we have another area that you may want to consider too. You know those indigo kids, the indigo crystal children, the rainbow children? My child's an indigo. If you know what I'm talking about here, just type in indigo children. Oh dear God. Which is essentially, my child is special. They were born spiritually licensed, spiritually pure. They're here to transform mankind. My child is more special than any other child because they're an indigo. That's weird. That's really weird. And I do wonder if that in itself is a form of projected something, because that child isn't. The child clearly is not what the parent thinks they are. But of course, the parent now is the highly special parent because they've got a highly special child. They've given birth to the Christ child. And so they are now sort of the Mother Mary who has to raise the challenges. I have to go with my child because he's indigo. So I do wonder if what we're seeing is a new genre of Munchausen's by proxy, where it's not medical abuse of the child. It's actually a psychological identity type abuse that can happen. And I'm sure already within culture there's plenty of those sort of things anyway, where the parent projects an identity onto the child that the child does not possess. This is not Munchausen by proxy, but beauty pageants where they parade little tiny children as though they're little starlets or porn queens. There's just something about that makes me extremely uncomfortable. And I do wonder about the motivations of some of those parents as well. Now, I mentioned the person who was rescuing dogs. Now, Munchausen's by proxy is where it's a caregiver or a parent. Now have a look at some therapists. Because the Munchausen by proxy person relies on your illness, so I get attention. So I care for you because I want to be the celebrity, I want to be the center of it all. And now look at the behavior of many life coaches, personal development gurus, many NLP practitioners, or any of the alphabet therapies, whose primary thing for helping other people is I get to be a celebrity master coach. I'm a master trainer. They give themselves enormously grandiose titles based on very, very little qualification. Just certification by weekend courses, or even reading a book, just turning up on the last day to get the certificate. Now what we have are people who have very high levels of virtue signaling in order to garner attention. And they love to boast about how seriously impressive their clients are. I work with celebrities. I work with people who pay $1 million for a one-session coaching session. I work with really ill people. You know, they will compete with who's got the most high status or most ill client in order to make themselves look good. And then you see the virtue signaling that goes on around it. And there's lots of that takes place on the internet and on social media, which then moves us into, and I'll do a separate video on this, Munchausen's by internet. Which I think is actually a very good outlet for a lot of these Munchausens who would otherwise have to rely on human-to-human direct contact to get the attention they crave. But now, of course, they can fabricate an identity on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, or anything else. I'm just consulting my piece of paper here to see if there's anything else I wanted to go on about. I think that's all I've got. For more information on Munchausen's, that kind of stuff, you can do no better. Dr. Mark Feldman, his website is Munchausen or Munchausens, doesn't really matter, .com. It's Mark Feldman, munchausens.com. The number one expert. Read his books. His books are phenomenal and really explain this thing well. The other one you want to look at is also Sam Vaknin. And I do wonder if there's such... He's a narcissist expert, and you'll do no better for narcissism. Because here's the thing. Narcissism by proxy, where my child is indigo, my child is the special child, that kind of thing, is that narcissism by proxy? And is that itself a form of Munchausen? I don't know. I'd be interested in what other people think. Do use that comment section. If you've got any other suggestions around subject matter for Munchausen's by proxy, do please leave a comment and I will see what I can do in the next video.